I want to come up here and jump in and introduce, I could not pass up introducing this individual, G. Edward Griffin. He is somebody I've known probably, it feels like a decade almost, through the network, through the movement idea. And I have spent a couple days at his home, being in this library he has upstairs of wealth of knowledge. This gentleman, G. Edward Griffin, is the expert on the monetary reserve, the Federal Reserve System. And he has taught me so much about it. In fact, when I was 13 years old, my dad put a book in front of me. It's about this big. It felt like this big because I was really small. And it was G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. He has written books about so many topics, about health, and his book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, I think he sold millions, I don't know, of copies, but he has really put the truth out there about the Federal Reserve note, and I'm so honored to have him here today and can call him a friend and also a mentor and hero. Welcome, G. Edward Griffin, to United We Stand.
Whoops. Thank you, Christina, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure. I know everyone's supposed to say that, a pleasure to be here, but believe me, it really is, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I don't know if the cameras have shown you the beautiful scenery around here. How could this be any better place in the world, except up the hill where I live. That's the other reason it's so good to be part of this, is because this is practically in my backyard. And that's the reason that Christina and I have crossed paths a couple of times. So it's good to be here. It's good to be in America celebrating the 4th of July. And I was thinking quite a bit the last couple of days what to talk about, whether I should talk about the theme of the 4th of July and American independence from a tyrannical government. And I thought, somehow that doesn't fit today, because we have slipped back in history to the point where we probably are at the same point we were at the time of the American Revolution, because, as most of you know, our system is not what it was when I was born. Seems like 1,000 years ago, but when I was born, not that long ago in terms of history, America was different. I was told that this was a nation of free people, and that we were independent, we were individuals, we didn't have a government that told us what to do, we told it what to do. I was born into a system where we thought the government was here to protect us and not provide for us. I was born into a system that I thought fought against all of the collectivist tyrannies of the world. We fought against fascism and Nazism. We took a hard stance against communism, and we didn't like or approve of any of those variants of collectivism. And so I thought, so lucky I was to be born into that system. Little did I realize that even then, that system was already gone. That's a horrible thing for me to have to say, but it's true. If we're going to speak the truth, and if we want to know what the truth is and change our reality, we have to understand what the reality is and not pretend anymore. So I decided that probably giving the typical 4th of July speech about American independence, when in fact we're not independent anymore, and instead of speaking about the independent American who is not independent anymore, dependent upon institutions and on governments, told what to do, what not to do, where to stand, how far apart to stand, all in the name of some crisis or another, I decided that instead of talking about these things that we wish were true, I'd rather talk about one of the tactics that has been used to change our system from what it was to what it is now. A tactic that maybe many of our friends have not really considered. And that is the tactic of crisis. It's true that when a man is drowning, he's not interested in a discussion about the Bill of Rights. When a man is struggling or a woman is struggling for their life and their livelihood, to protect their family, they don't care about whether it's legal or not. These discussions of right and wrong and constitutional and legal fade into the distance when people think they're struggling for their very existence. And this is a tactic, or not a tactic exactly, but it's a fact of human consciousness that has been recognized by the enemies of liberty for a long, long time. And they have actually decided and theorized, as I discovered, they've written books on it, they've held conferences on it, they've written papers and had panel discussions on how you can convince a free people to voluntarily give up their liberties and be grateful for it at the same time. And not only to be grateful for it, but to pay for it. And it seems like an impossible challenge, but no, it's not impossible. There are many books written on it. The one that just comes to mind right now, which those of you who have read The Creature from Jekyll Island that was just mentioned a moment ago by Christina, there's a chapter in that book about, in my book, about another book called A Report from Iron Mountain, which is supposedly, the author is not known for sure, we think we know now, but it was offered to the reader as a think tank study. Whether it was or it was not, it was presented as such, and the ideas in it were stunning. And that is that this group of intellectuals, supposedly funded by the Defense Department under Defense Secretary McNamara, was tasked with the question of how do we stabilize society in a modern world? That's how they phrased it. How do we stabilize society? But when you start to read the book itself, you find out that they're not talking about stabilizing society in the sense that you and I might think of it. Their definition of stabilizing society was, how do you prevent the people from uprising against the tyrannical government and overthrowing it? How do you stabilize a tyrannical government, in other words, was really their message, because they knew that when taxes got too high and when personal liberties were being affronted, there was a nasty habit that the people had of overthrowing that government. So they conducted this study of how do you stabilize society and prevent that from happening. Well, that's an interesting topic, I thought. I thought it was so interesting and so apropos to our modern world that I devoted a chapter to that in The Creature from Jekyll Island. But just for those of you who may need a little refresher on it, they looked at all the ways in which this could be done historically. It was a very intellectual or very academic type of a study. And they said of all the things that could be used, war, or the threat of war, was the most successful in past history. Because when people were struggling to defend the nation against a dreaded conqueror, a tyrant from beyond their borders, somebody who would conquer their land and kill their people and take their property and everything, why then they stopped worrying about their own leaders, who could even be a dictator. And they were conditioned to view their leader in this time of great crisis of survival, to view the leader as the hero, because he was the leader of them in the defense against something so horrible. And so there was this transfusion of identity between the leader, no matter how bad he might have been otherwise. He became a hero because he was defending the nation against an external enemy. And you can see that looking at historic photographs. If you look at, going back in World War II, for example, look at all the pictures of Hitler going through the streets. And already people knew that people were being put into extermination camps and people had lost their freedom under Nazism. But they were all at the streets waving and cheering Hitler as he went by. When I'm told that when Stalin died and when Lenin died, they put their carcasses in some kind of a frozen container or a gas chamber. People could go by and pay last respects to their dictator, their tormentor, who killed millions and millions of their fellow countrymen, and yet they lined up for miles to be able to walk by the casket of their former dictator and crying. You could see that some of the women were crying over the loss of this horrible, horrible person. How is that possible? And it's possible, according to this book, the report from Iron Mountain, it's because in times of national crisis, the population tends to identify the leader. Even though he may be an atrocious dictator, they identify the leader with themselves as their nation, and therefore he is to be revered. The report from Iron Mountain went beyond that. It said, all right, war has always been successful in doing this. What else? Now the report said, we're coming to the point where possibly there will be no nations anymore. That's what we would like to see, they said, where there would be no nations. It would be one world government. And so the idea of war would be impossible. What could we use now, should that happen, if we couldn't have a war? So they went through all the lists of things that could happen. Well, they said, it has to be horrible, it has to be frightening. And they said, incidentally, it doesn't have to be real. This is interesting. Is that as long as the people could be convinced that it was real, that's all that was required, because perception is everything. They said, furthermore, if it could be real, all the better. And one of the things they mentioned, it was very stunning to see it, they said, what about environmental degradation? What about global warming? They didn't use that word. But what about the climate? What about nature? Could we convince people that pollution was so bad and the deterioration of the natural environment was so bad that it would be an existential threat to the whole planet? Could people get excited about that and be willing to surrender their liberties and consider that this is a common enemy and we must not worry about constitutional rights or anything like that because we got to save the planet? They said, well, be a hard thing to do, but they said, we have enough real pollution. We could pump that up and make it look really worse than it is, but we got the real thing out there. We could start with that. And of course, we could make it worse too. We could deliberately, and they said, believe it or not, we could make it worse on purpose. And we could go down the line. So all of these things were considered. Oh, by the way, they even mentioned the possibility of a pretended invasion from outer space. That was a topic of conversation just a few minutes ago in the room down the way here. We were talking about, well, what do you think about all this news coverage that we're getting now about aliens and UFOs? It used to be that the media was always snarl at that and ridicule any story like that. And all of a sudden, the light switch was turned on, and the media now is playing up all these stories about UFOs and released documents and everything. And so the question is, well, could they be planning to condition the public mind to accept UFO invasion as something real? And of course, this is something that was discussed back in the day, in McNamara's day. And they said, well, the technology is not yet ready for that. So we'll have to postpone that for a future day. So you get the idea that this is something that doesn't just happen, that these events, these crisis events, don't just happen. They're strategized, they're designed, and they're manipulated, and in most cases, I'll say most cases, they are created. They are engineered. Now, where does this start? It has a historic element to it, and I'd like to just take the remainder of my time here. I can't go into great historical analysis of this thing, but I have a couple of little tidbits and factoids that you might find interesting. If we go back to the year that's why I have my notes here. If we go back to the year 1895, I believe it is. Yeah, 1895. Put your mind back to 1895 to a very wealthy suburb of London. And picture in your mind's eye there a small group of people, all from the elite. They were the wealthy class. None of them had a job. They all had huge inheritances and all that sort of thing. Very wealthy, very well educated, very high-minded, very desirous of helping mankind, as long as they didn't have to work for that. They wanted to create a new system because they felt there was a lot of suffering and a lot of injustice out there. And so at this particular time, in that mansion, in that part of London, they created a secret society. You can read all about this secret society now. It's in most of the textbooks. You'll find it on the internet in tidbits here and there. I've done a lot of research on that in preparation for The Creature from Jekyll Island, and I probably know more than I really wanted to know about it. But I can tell you this much, that the stuff you read on the internet is not the real nitty-gritties. It's sort of a bleached version of it. It makes it seem like these people were all high-minded and everything, and many of them were. I don't mean to question that. But they had a plan to change the world for the better in their minds. But what kind of a plan? I mean, wouldn't we all want to get together and come up with a plan? Maybe that's what we're here for here today. We want to change the world for the better. So let's take a look at that plan. Their plan was this in a nutshell: how to conquer the world, and they used that word, how to conquer the world without firing a shot, without invading one nation against another, how to do it in a very gradual way and make the people who are being conquered grateful for it and not even realize that they've been conquered. Kind of an interesting challenge. And so they came up with the idea that they would have an ideological movement that they would create, and they called themselves the Fabian Socialist Society. Now they used the word socialist, but I want to emphasize that in the context of their essays, their writings, they were prolific writers, most of them, the word socialist was not distinguishable from the word communist or fascist. We come to a realization early on that all of these words, communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, progressivism, whatever you want to say, liberalism, when you peel off the labels of these things and you look underneath them to see what the ideology was or is, they're all the same. It's an amazing discovery. I was probably 28, 29 years old before I discovered that. I always thought that, why, we fought a war in World War II between the communists and the Nazis, right? Well, you had to choose sides. You either like the Nazis or you like the communists. It's like today, you either like the Democrats or the Republicans or the left or the right. You had to choose sides, right? Little did I know that there was no choice. That no matter which side you were on, you had adopted the same ideology underneath. And so they called themselves the Socialist Society, but please understand that the word that we should keep in mind when we analyze these groups is collectivism. Socialism, communism, Nazism, fascism are merely variants of something called collectivism, and that's common to them all. So, having said that, that's a little side trip. They, when Stalin came to power, or when the Bolshevik Revolution was successful, and Stalin came to power, a lot of the Fabian socialists said, "Oh, hooray, we finally have a country." Oh, it's wonderful. They loved Stalin. And they even sent some of their members to go to Russia to investigate, to see how it was working out, because now they had they had a country that they could, use as their base. And most of these very genteel people came back broken, crushed. They said, "Oh my God, they adopted collectivism, all right. But look how many people they're murdering, killing, and torturing, and lying, and stealing, and they've destroyed society. They're doing it wrong. The idea was good," they said, "but they're doing it wrong. They're doing it by force and violence. No, they should do it our way, which is by peace and gradualism and no violence until you have to at the very end." And so they took a look at communism. Most of them came back and said, no, we are now anti-communist. But the only reason was because of the methods to achieve their ultimate goal of collectivism, and nothing about the goal itself. It's important to understand that, and that's the main difference between the communists and the socialists today, and that is the means of coming to power. All right, having said that, now let me explain a couple of things. My analysis of the Fabian Socialist Society is that they had three major pillars of their program. They are called, I call them at least, the 3 Ds, which is delay, deception, and Destruction. That's the real word I'm here to talk about today, destruction. So I'm going to have to crank this kind of fast. I hate to do it, but I know we don't have time. Now, the delay part comes from the name of their organization, which is the Fabian Society. Well, what's that all about? Well, it was named after a very obscure Roman general. Let's see if I can. I don't remember his name. I always have to look it up. Oh, yes, Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus. You can see why I can't remember it. Yeah. So that's why they call it the Fabian Society. So what was there about this general? Well, he was famous because he was the only guy that ever defeated Hannibal. Now, Hannibal, I didn't know much about him either. Believe me, I was not a student in school. History was very boring to me, and all this stuff just washed over me. I had to go back and reread it. One thing I did remember about Hannibal, though, is that you don't mess with this guy. He never lost to anybody. He always won his armies always won the wars. How is it that this guy I'd never heard of could defeat Hannibal? Well, then I found out. He was called the general of delay because he would delay his battles. He would say, yes, we'll meet you on the battlefield. They'd get everybody there, and then he would move away. And Hannibal always had a huge army to feed and support, and they were waiting for the battle to start, and his enemy moved away. So they'd chase him. Then they set up camp and go to fight, and then he would move away. And Hannibal developed what today we would call guerrilla tactics. Attack unexpectedly from the side, not front on. Don't raise your flag and say, we'll see you at sunrise, you know? And you look at the hill, and there they all are at the top of the hill, and they move in a phalanx. It's the old style. No. Fabius would come in from the backside and the behind, and he'd run and they'd retreat. And Hannibal didn't know what to do with it. It finally got tired of supplying all this huge army, and he would quit and go home. So Fabius was chosen as the name for the Fabian Society because of this patient gradualism. Well, I'm going to use that phrase from here on because that's more understandable in terms of today's strategies. Because of patient gradualism, not all at once, because you know the old saying, if you take a frog and you put it in a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out because it's too hot, got too hot all at once. But if you put him in cold water and gradually increase the temperature, he'll just flip around and allow himself to be boiled. Well, it's the same principle. So the Fabian said, look, we're not going to put the frog into a pot of hot water. We're going to put the frog into a pot of cool water, and we're going to gradually turn up the heat so that maybe 1 or 2 or 3 generations later, we will win. We will have the whole shebang without having to fire a single shot. Now that's important to know because that is the strategy that most, in fact, all of the collectivist movements of today have really adopted as their go-to strategy. Now, deception. They understood that in order for them to accomplish this goal of world conquest, with the people not objecting to it, they wouldn't have to know that that was their goal. They had to hide that. And so this is interesting. Let me just take a side trip to explain this better. The house that I was describing was called the Webb House. It was Sidney and Beatrice Webb owned the home. They were very wealthy people. And they donated the house to the Fabian Socialist Society for their headquarters for quite a few years. And there was a fabled story about a stained glass window that was on the back wall of this headquarters that had a composite illustration of all of the elements of the Fabian Socialist Society's ideology. And I came across, in my research, a drawing of it. Later on, this window was discovered by Sotheby in a warehouse, and it was very valuable. It had been taken down later and stored, and finally it was put up for sale. I don't know what it sold for, but a huge amount of money. So it's now on display in the museum of the London School of Economics, which was founded by this group. The Fabian Society created the London School of Economics, and in their library now they have this window. And the reason I'm making a big deal about the window is because you're going to see some interesting stuff on that window. But I finally got a picture of the real window in color because they put it on display, and there's Tony Blair standing next to it like you'd stand with your arm around somebody, you know, and take a group picture. He's standing next to the window. It was about this big. And because Tony Blair, of course, was a member of the Fabian Socialist Society. And so anyway, it finally got into the main press. Now let's talk about the window. And in the category of deception, first of all, that was designed by George Bernard Shaw, playwright Shaw. It was stolen in 1978. I mentioned that. It was finally discovered in 2005, etc. Now, the reason I'm making a big deal out of it, in the center of this window is a depiction of a wolf. And he has a sheep's skin around his shoulders. And there you have it, symbolic, the wolf in sheep's clothing. Right there in the center of their window. This is their strategy, and they wanted everybody who understood who they were to realize that that was not just a decoration, it was a strategy for world conquest. Now, the third element, I have to move along, destruction. This is really my point. Below the wolf in sheep's clothing, there is a depiction of an anvil, and on the anvil is the earth. It's a round globe sitting on the anvil, and there are two people there. They're there with hammers. George Shaw and I think it was Sidney Webb, but they're members, and they've got the hammer, and they're ready poised to strike the earth. Why? What is that all about? Underneath that is this line, famous line from Omar Khayyam. The line goes as follows: "Dearest love, if thou and I with fate could conspire, would we not grasp this sorry scheme of things entire, and smash it to bits, and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire?" Now just think about that. Would we not smash the earth to bits? Not to reform it, not to improve it, not to solve problems, smash it to bits so that we could remold the broken pieces closer to their heart's desire, which they called socialism, which we know as collectivism. And ladies and gentlemen, once you understand the power of this group, probably most people have never heard of it, maybe never will, but this idea has gone out throughout the world. All of the collectivist groups of the world, very few of them are actual members of the Fabian Socialist Society, but they've adopted this strategy: smash it to bits. They're not trying to fix anything. They want destruction. They want despair. They want people in desperation, not asking questions about legality or constitutionality or right or wrong. We've got to survive. Smash it to bits. Once you understand that, you will understand virtually, I'm going to say over 90% of everything that's happening in the world today that doesn't make sense. The reason it doesn't make sense is because you and most of us have had the idea that these politicians who are making these things happen really want to fix something. They don't want to fix anything. They want to destroy what we have, bring it to dust. They want us all underwater, struggling for air. Once you understand that this is strategy and this is designed, then you will understand what happened to America. We lost America because of these strategies. And it's important, if we want to talk about fair elections and what to do about it and getting candidates, we have to have an understanding of what the problem really is. These people are not trying to fix anything. And if you vote for somebody that doesn't understand what I'm talking about, there's no such possibility as a fair election, because you're just electing ignorance. So with that, that's my story. And since I'm hearing applaud, it's a good time to leave. Thank you very much.